Thanks for listening to the Building Better Business podcast. I'm Dr. Bryan. I'm an educator, business owner, and your host. Our podcast provides a platform for business leaders to share their personal stories and how they've transformed their business success by focusing on marketplace trust. Join us in building better business. Today we have a wonderful guest. We have John Rush today. I'd like to tell you what business he's in, but he's got so many of them that we'll take our entire podcast to kind of go through. John, thank you so much for coming and being a part of our podcast.
Sir. Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah,
I appreciate it.
Well, I'm very intrigued to learn more about you and about your businesses. I mean, the business that I really started with was 1-800-DEMO, but then there's several others that I'm looking at as well as we've been as I've done some research with you, and then we've been talking. But John, I think part of what our audience really is interested in initially is your own journey. You know, your entrepreneurial journey. I looked a little bit. You went to North Park University for an undergrad, and then you wound up at Northwest University for an MBA as well. So walk us through the journey. How did you start? What started you down this path, and what were all the events along the way that got you to where you're at today?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest influences was my dad early on. My dad was a car mechanic in West Virginia, had his own little shop. And I remember as a small boy hanging out at the shop, answering the telephone and cleaning the shop. I would try to tinker around and fix things, but I was always better at taking things apart than putting them back together. But I saw how Dad took care of his customers and had just a real heart for the folks that came into the shop, did his job with integrity. He wasn't, and from a business standpoint, necessarily the best businessman. I mean, when he passed away of pancreatic cancer 12 years ago, customers that he had served for 30 years were at the funeral, and folks, would communicate how their price hadn't changed, for 20 years. And I thought, well, that was Dad.
That's good and bad.
Yeah. Not necessarily the best business idea.
Right.
There's this thing called inflation. But from a people standpoint, he cared for his customers. He loved his customers. And I got to see that firsthand as a kid around the shop. And so I think that was a huge, influence. And then I think my mom, I have two moms. I have a biological mom and a stepmom. And my biological mom, she's been in recovery now for over 40 years. And I think her journey has also had a huge influence in my life. And so to see her, she had a lot of trauma, early childhood trauma, and that included both sexual and physical abuse. And so and early on struggled with addiction, and to see her get victory in that area of her life. And so I think that the influences as a kid being around my dad and my mom, and they were divorced, so it was, in two different stories. Yeah. But they both kind of laid the foundation for
Well, the parents are so important, aren't they?
Oh, yeah.
It's a reminder when we start having children, or in my case, grandkids, right? Yeah. Just the parental influence is so powerful. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. And so from there, I spent my early childhood in West Virginia, then lived with my mom up in Cleveland, Ohio. And then after I graduated high school, joined the Marine Corps. And I would say in the Marines, I learned a lot about the world. I got to visit a lot of countries and got to see what life was like in places like Haiti and Japan. And so I kind of had a taste of what poverty was like in the States, but to see it in other countries was also eye-opener. And
great training ground for you, though, as well, right? Yeah. I didn't serve, but my father was a officer in the Army, so I grew up as a military brat. Yeah. So I understand.
It's definitely a challenging environment for a family. Yeah. But it's a great learning opportunity, and I often will encourage folks, especially that are in the early phase of life, that if you can commit to something for 2 to 4 years, if you choose to go to college, obviously that's a 4-year commitment. But even after that, take 2 to 4 years and firmly plant yourself somewhere and hell or high water, like just decide you're going to do that, because even though you may not like it, you're going to learn a lot, and you're going to grow a lot, mature a lot, and learn a lot about self-discipline in those 2 to 4 years that will help you build a more solid foundation for wherever it is you do really want to end up.
Yeah.
But if you go from place to place every 3 months, every 6 months, you're going to lose some of that learning.
Yeah, and there's so many people in our culture today that they're not embracing that for whatever reason, right? But yeah, that idea of you don't learn the details unless you immerse yourself.
Yeah,
like you're saying, and you don't learn the discipline either.
Yeah,
as from what you're saying.
Yeah, life is complicated, and to cultivate a spirit of perseverance, endurance, fortitude, loyalty, those are all things that will bode you well in the future if you can learn to kind of, ingrain those into your DNA early on.
So you go from the military. Somehow you wound up at North Park University, and you pursued a degree in nonprofit management.
I did, yes.
Yeah. So what kind of spurred that along?
Yeah, the educational background. I often have told my kids over the years. We have 8 kids, 6 boys and 2 girls, my wife and I, and we have 1 left at the house. And but I've often told my kids, do not take the educational route that I took. I'm grateful for the opportunity. But yeah, I did my first undergraduate degree in theology and ancient languages, and then I did my first 2 graduate degrees at Wheaton College in Illinois. Yeah. One was in New Testament studies, and the other was in religion and American life.
Okay.
And then from there, started my MBA at North Park, but then got accepted at Kellogg at Northwestern. At that specific time, Deb and I, we had already had our 8 kids, and I was involved in helping an organization called Clean Slate in Chicago get off the ground and running. Transitional job program focused on hiring folks who had challenges in their past, owned by a nonprofit organization. So it was a for-profit owned by a 501c3.
Right.
And so really enjoyed and backing up a little bit, when we first moved to Chicago, I thought I wanted to be involved in faith-based work in some capacity in an urban environment.
Right.
Volunteered at a shelter, and part of that volunteer activity, I started connecting with some of the guys in the shelter. And as they started to put into practice the things that were necessary for them to stay clean and sober, they'd start looking for work. And then I'd continually hear, hey, nobody's going to hire me. Nobody's going to hire me.
Right.
Nobody will hire me. And I was like, well, let's just start a company. And so we tried to start a painting company when I was in grad school. And
by the way, I love that. I'm sorry. I just love that. It's like, oh, hey, there's an issue here. Let's just start a company and solve that.
Oh, yeah. I mean,
I love
if nobody
that.
else is going to hire you, then that's their loss.
What a great idea.
Like I'm around you guys. Like I know that so you develop a certain sort of relationship, folks are going to do what needs to be done.
Right.
Now, whether or not they know how to, folks know how to paint, everybody knows how to do a lot of things until, until the rubber, meets the road. But And so I think, and this is back in the flip phone time frame, and I remember getting a text in grad school that the poodle ran through the paint tray in a gigantic house in Naperville, Illinois. And I thought, I don't know what in the world I'm doing with my life right now, but it's probably not the best idea, to try to think that I can manage this business while I'm in grad school with 8 kids, and so. Yeah. But I think the seed of how can I use business as a means to provide employment for folks who are typically passed over to marketplace. That's really when it started to germinate, was through that experience. Right. And so then Clean Slate became an opportunity a few years after that, 2 or 3 years after that. And Clean Slate was initially funded by a grant from Goldman Sachs. We had a Goldman Sachs managing director that was on the board of our nonprofit organization, who became, for all intents and purposes, like a mentor for me. Nice. And so having that board of directors, having this fella, his name was Mark, and then having Eric, who was the CEO of the nonprofit, as mentors for me, and then having the opportunity to really grow a business within a nonprofit that was focused on transitional employment, while at North Park pursuing my MBA. That was like the best of all worlds. But then I got accepted at Kellogg for my MBA program. So I stayed at North Park and did their master's in nonprofit management while I did my MBA at Northwestern. Wow. And and by that point, we were launching a company called 180 Preservation Services, which is different than 180 Demo here in Columbus.
Okay.
But I think it was the experience of launching 180 Property Preservation, having just done Clean Slate, and being at North Park University in the nonprofit management program with a lot of tree hugging, kumbaya singing fellow colleagues who were really about doing great in the world. While at Kellogg with, and again, not to over stereotype in both organizations, schools, but Northwestern, a lot of my colleagues were bottom line, big corporate,
finance oriented.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so bringing those worlds together, which is exactly what we were doing at Clean Slate and 180 Property Preservation, practically while in the education environment was a really cool experience.
Can I interrupt? Because this I think this is so important for not only students that are moving out into the work environment, but also those of us that are out that want to be entrepreneurial, right? That have that idea of starting a business and running a business. I think it's really important to understand that your business, you pull from your background, right? So Clean Slate allows you to learn basically the industry, right? You got to see about transitional employment. You got your hands dirty, right? In that you learned, you probably made some mistakes there. And then the educational component too. I like how you weave that in, but I think it's really important, right? That you create this foundation from which you then launch your ideas from.
Yeah.
Was that fair?
Oh, that's 100% correct. Yeah. I think, and doing everything you can to stay as coachable as possible and recognize you are going to make mistakes and be comfortable with the fact that you will and hope that they're not too big of mistakes, but, and having people around you that you can lean on, ask advice from. Yeah. But stay an open book. I mean, I still hope that I'm just as much of an open book as I was then, and maybe even more so now. But constantly learning, there's always new things to learn. But I think the coachability is huge. And I've seen a lot of folks who have entrepreneurial aspirations, but haven't really gotten themselves to a place where they're confident enough to be coachable.
Interesting. Or open enough to be coached. Right? Yeah.
Right. And I think it's a significant lack of confidence that prevents people from being coachable, even though you would think it's kind of counterintuitive. The more confident you are, the less you need to be coached because you're so confident about your own ability. Yeah. But the reality is you just lack a lot of confidence. And that's why you're not open to constructive feedback, criticism, feedback, because you have these barriers that are constructed around you. And that's not real confidence. That's a false confidence. And so being able to kind of break through that and be okay with walking into the room, being the most ignorant person in the room, even though you may not be, but being open to, there's a lot of people in here, or maybe there's one or two, but there's so much I can learn from this person, from that person. That coachability is huge.
Well, Focus 4C is the 4 C's are, leadership character, which is really part of what you're talking about, and then engaging cultures, serving customers, and building community. And what we're talking about right now is part of that is the character of wanting to be a good leader, right? Being self-aware, having humbleness, right? Humility, respecting others' opinions. Right. All of that is important to grow as a leader. Right. Otherwise, I say this a lot. You have blinders on, right, and you make mistakes because of your own sort of ego and your own pride in how you're pursuing that. So, how did you move from Chicago to Columbus then? There's a transition here. I'm thinking.
There was a microfinance organization in Chicago called Axion, and I was on the board of. And the fellow that led that, his dad lived in Columbus, and his dad was on the board of a nonprofit here in town that focused on primarily men in recovery. And he had a desire to start some sort of business that could employ folks that were a part of this nonprofit. And so this dad and his son were talking over Thanksgiving one day, and the son said, well, there's a guy on my board that's doing this in Chicago. Maybe you guys could connect and he could give you some ideas. And that was how that introduction led to me meeting a fellow named Mark Brereton, who was very instrumental in rounding up about 7 other folks to be what I call philanthropic investors who provided the seed capital for us to get started. It wasn't a lot. It was about $300,000 in startup capital. And initially there was 8 of us that owned the business. And so Deb and I were both like, hey, this is a great opportunity. And at that time, at 180 in Chicago, it too was a business that was actually owned by two nonprofits. And so, and that had its own sets of challenges, because here I am, I'm the president of that organization, but, I have no ownership, and I'm reporting to two other CEOs of two other nonprofits.
Yeah, that's always a difficulty.
And it was, and I was a difficult person. I'm an entrepreneur. So, sometimes entrepreneurs are very driven, independent, so it's like, and so
correct.
I'd like to think I was coachable, but I also had my opinions, and like I was learning and, how to communicate more. But that was I remember that.
But again, good training ground. Good training ground, right? Good training ground.
But I pushed and pushed and pushed. The other piece for me was like, I really loved sales. I really loved building the business. And sometimes the amount of work coming in and the capacity of everyone else. And when you're owned by a nonprofit, the capacity of the nonprofit to keep up. Yeah. Is limited. And for me at that time, I remember thinking, well, then you guys do your job better so you can keep up. That was kind of my mindset, because I'm growing this thing. And so it was extremely frustrating for that team. And I learned a lot. I definitely hurt a lot of people too in the process, unfortunately. And so just because I didn't learn how to kind of calm down and work with the team in a more effective and
yeah, you say that, but what's interesting, again, this is the idea of leadership being self-aware, right? And nobody's perfect. And, the idea of being able to sort of assess where you're at, right? Are we leaving a wake behind us, right? and if so, how do I fix that? Yeah. Right? So that we don't make that mistake again going forward. See, that's the essence of character and leadership, right? It's this idea of understanding that you're leading others, right? And you don't do that by yelling and beating them with a stick, right? You lead them through high character. Yeah. So then you came here, and this would have been CleanTurn.
Correct.
Right?
Yes.
This would have been the company CleanTurn. And what is that CleanTurn focuses on? What's their primary focus?
So when we moved, so we launched CleanTurn in 2012. And when we started, initially we were going to do property preservation work here in the Columbus market. Right. Very similar to what 180 Property Preservation did in Chicago. We had what we thought I was bringing to Bank of America and Safeguard were kind of the two larger clients that we had in Chicago that needed work to be done here in Columbus. No sooner than we had moved here, they entered into acquisition conversations. And so the whole countrywide portfolio that Bank of America inherited at the time, Safeguard was going to be taking on that portfolio from a property preservation management standpoint. At least this is what I was told. And so they couldn't technically bring on any new vendors in the Columbus market. And I was told this in January after I'd already moved here, having already had conversations that this is what we were going to be doing.
Welcome to Columbus.
And so I'm like, okay, well, great. Here we are. We have a little bit shy of $300,000. We bought a truck. Deb and I moved into a house that her uncle purchased out of foreclosure, and we were like, okay, we can anchor down here. The boys can share a room. It was a 3-bedroom, and so the boys shared a room, the girls shared a room, and Deb and I had a room. And we were like, sweet, let's just get acclimated. I knew maybe 10 people, and 7 of those were the other investors in Columbus. It wasn't the guy. And I'm like, what do we do? Well, you just start, who do you guys know? And you just start networking. And what is the closest thing in the marketplace to property preservation that we can tap into? And within that first year, we had 8 separate business lines. I would never encourage anybody to start a business this way. I mean, the initial business plan was 10 slides with a bunch of pictures and very few words and no financials. And so not the way to launch. But we had 8 business lines by the end of the first year. And we lost a lot of money. We burned through that $300,000 pretty quick. Yeah. But by year 2, we doubled our revenue in year 2. I think we were close to a little over $1 million in year 2. Yeah. And it literally was just a lot of networking. I mean, it was a lot of networking, a lot of connecting. And then over time, CleanTurn became more focused on commercial cleaning. And so we began to axe different business lines and to focus on the ones that that kind of dovetailed with our initial kind of big picture mission of why we exist, which I know we'll get into a little bit later. But we've narrowed CleanTurn down. It's focused down to commercial cleaning. Over these last 5 years, CleanTurn is exclusively now a commercial cleaning company. And then one of those business lines we split off as its own separate business, and that's 180 Demo. 180 Demo,
yeah. It's interesting, right? So a lot of times companies have to pivot. You made 8 pivots, but but still, it's a sense of experimentation, right? You're experimenting. You're seeing what the markets are, right? Yeah. And that's a really valid way to grow a business. Oh, yes. Not the easiest, right? Not the easiest sometimes, but it is valid. Yeah. And then you find the businesses that you're successful in, and then as you did, you sort of narrowed down into that.
Yeah, right? It's like heavy caffeinated square dancing for sure.
Yeah. Great way to describe it. So I think we have a good understanding, with your history, your family history all the way through your early employment there, of why you're engaging in social entrepreneurship. In fact, on your LinkedIn site, you declare that right away, right? Social entrepreneurship. Mm-hmm. Obviously, this is a passion of your heart that's coming out, probably influenced by several areas there. I think what's interesting for our listeners to understand is you've got your hands, you've started 4 or 5 businesses units here, and they're not nonprofits. Why are they not nonprofits? Why are they for-profit organizations?
Yeah, that's a great question. We wanted initially CleanTurn. The idea was, can we do nonprofit sort of mission-centric work, leveraging good, solid marketplace practices, and so that if we can, the money that may be typically donated to an organization like ours can be freed up to be contributed to other needs in a community that can't be solved through this sort of model. Mm-hmm. And so the idea is and then for the investors, is there a way to have them diversify their portfolio by still seeing a return, maybe a slightly less of a return, but at the same time, it's a return. But their initial dollar, rather than it just, not that this is a bad thing, but when you give your dollar away, you're going to have impact with that dollar, but that dollar is gone. If you can take that dollar and invest it and make money on that dollar, and it can have an impact, right, you've, great. That's the best of both worlds. And then you can take your earnings and you could reinvest it and do it all over again. And so your dollar becomes a dollar that just gives in perpetuity. Yeah. And it's not a new dollar that you have to give next year. It's a dollar that earned a dollar that you're able to give over time. And so, so that was the other thing. So we wanted to see if we could do this just in a traditional market kind of for-profit sort of market approach strategy. And I think you can. I mean, I think, and I don't think you have to give up anything. I think you can do really, really well and do really, really good things at the same time. I don't think it's an either or choice. Also, in saying that, I don't think that there's not a place for nonprofits. And I also don't think that every for-profit business has to embrace the same sort of, mission strategy that we have. I would strongly encourage any business to be open to the possibility of recognizing that just because a person has a certain sort of past, that they do some personal inventory and recognize areas in their own life where they've made some dramatic changes, and then kind of extrapolate from that the possibility that other human beings can do the same. And that if it wasn't for the second chances that they've received, they might not be where they're at. And so maybe they could extend that same opportunity to somebody else. I would always want to encourage that.
So. That's a great challenge. I love that. I support that. Exactly. Word for word. So I'm going to have you come back. We're going to do a second podcast later. And in that podcast, I want to explore more of the culture that you're building in these organizations and working with your employees. Okay. I think that's a whole separate area that we want to explore. And how does that translate into building community as well as building culture? But what I want to do now is I want to sort of move, because we're in this first one, we're really focusing on, you're a social entrepreneur, but you run businesses, and these businesses need to be profitable. And so I want to move on, and I want to talk to you about how you think about serving your customers. So you're running a social entrepreneurship venture, several of them. And we've got CleanTurn that then morphed out of that 180 demo. And I guess we need to describe that. And then there's you have a Third Way Cafe. And I think you're right. I think I'm going to have you come back in a while with your son, right? And we'll talk about that. And then you have a real estate holding company called Rush Real Estate Holding and they're all social entrepreneurship ventures, right? Yes. I tell you what, let's do this. Describe for our audience here 180 demo. And then I want to shift to serving your customers. So 180 demo, what is this? I love this. I meant to bring my hammer.
Yeah. So that hammer is one of our great, wonderful tools. And so 180 demo is a commercial selective demolition company. So we work with about 200 general contractors here in Central Ohio. And throughout the state of Ohio, really, we do a lot of work in Cincinnati and Athens and as far up in the Cuyahoga County. We've done work in Kentucky and Pennsylvania. It's project-based. And so anywhere there's a renovation job happening, we want to be there on the front end to do whatever demo work is needed. And so we're the first subcontractor of the general contractors on most job sites other than the architect. And so they put together the plans. They tell us exactly on the plans what needs to be done. Yeah. And then our teams go out and do it. And so, and so we're very much serving a customer who is serving an end customer. Yeah. And so, all the general contractors, they have their primary customer who's getting that renovation done to their exact liking. And so our job on the front end is to make sure that project starts on time, safe, under budget, so that the general contractor looks absolutely amazing.
Love it. Now, I haven't told you this, but I've remodeled several homes, and so I understand the demo process. Yeah. And one of the things that's for me that's interesting about demo is I was thinking about it more closely. Demo, if you're not careful, you just think it's, hey, let's just go in and rip a bunch of things up and throw them in a dumpster, which, it does include that. But if you don't demo properly, you mess up everything for the contractors when they come in.
No,
right?
It's just as much a skilled trade as any other trade, because you're and you have to follow the architectural plans, and there's safety is huge, and so making sure that your team is OSHA trained and aware, and the tools that you use. And for us, we like to call commercial demo clean demo. You had mentioned residential demo. Residential demo can be dirty demo, especially if it's older homes where you're dealing with plaster and lath and things of that nature. And we used to do that, but the beauty of growing and being more focused, you can start to say no to certain things.
Right. So it's always a nice place to be.
We like to say no to residential. we do occasionally. We'll do a significantly large residential house. But most of the time it's commercial. But it requires a lot of skill, and you got to make sure that in most commercial sites you have sprinkler heads. You got to be careful to not hit. You have. There's electrical issues, there's plumbing issues, there's a lot of things to keep. And at the same time, it's a great segue for folks to springboard into the trades. And so
let's talk about that, because let's tell our audience, who are you hiring? And then, let's start there. Who are you hiring?
Yeah, so at 180 Demo, and the same is true at CleanTurn as a commercial cleaning company. And to a certain extent, even though it's not a big employer, the same is true for Third Way. Our focus is to provide supportive employment for folks who have high obstacles to employment. And so most of our staff, I used to say that we at CleanTurn, when we first started, I remember being in a meeting, and there was a HR professional in the room, and I said, we exclusively look to hire folks who've spent some time in prison. And she said, well, you can't say that. I'm like, what do you mean I can't say that? And she said, you're discriminating. And I said, oh, okay, well, we got to figure out a different way to say it then.
Okay,
right?
Yeah, there you go. So, words matter, I guess.
All right? So, and I don't know if that law was necessarily intended to go that direction. But at any rate, but we have hired between CleanTurn and 180 over the last 12 years, we've hired roughly 1,200 folks who've spent time in jail, prison, or are in recovery, or some combination of all those things.
Yeah, and the unfortunate part is people make mistakes, right, or life events, right? They wind up doing things that they shouldn't be doing, and these folks have a difficulty being hired, right?
Yes. Yeah. Once an individual ends up with a number and they spend time in jail or prison, it's difficult. It's become, I would say, arguably because I've been doing this for 30 years, it's become less difficult in a lot of ways. And I think that's encouraging. There's different reasons for that, I think, culturally, of why that's the case. But it's still a challenge. And it also depends on the sort of background that a person has. And even within the culture of backgrounds, folks have certain, it's interesting. If you're on the registry as a registered sex offender, you are treated and looked at differently, oftentimes by other folks who also have a criminal history.
Oh, interesting.
So if you create a business where you're open to hiring folks regardless of background and you include both populations, you're going to have to navigate the relational dynamic that can exist there. But for us over time, like, we've recognized a person's past does not dictate their future, and none of us want to be defined by our worst decisions.
Yeah.
I'm very much living in my second chance. The story within my story, and I can hint at it here, and we can talk about it more later. You had mentioned earlier, there's many reasons why you do what you do, and one of those reasons, of course, was tied to my family, tied to my faith. But one of the reasons early on was I felt like if I did this work in this way, that I would be able to change myself. And I could leverage my work as a means for me to deal with my demons. Wrong. It doesn't work that way.
Okay.
And so working harder for a good cause is not the recipe for dealing with your junk.
Interesting. Yeah.
And it took me a long time to get to a place where I recognized that's just that doesn't work. And then when you and for me, I compartmentalized, and I think it's easy for us to do as humans to compartmentalize our lives. And so I started to separate my struggles into a different category that I would deal with on my own, while I did great things perception wise and also in reality, like in the world and with the businesses that we had started. And so my kids, the community, my coworkers all had this perception of who John Rush was.
Right.
And that was very much a part of who I was. But then there was this compartmentalized, separated segment of who I was that nobody knew about.
Right.
And that part of me was the part that started as an early child when, for me personally, I learned about sex and pornography from an older guy, not much older, he was in college, but I was in 4th grade. And I didn't deal with it. I never dealt with that through junior high and high school. Yeah. And it's not the main reason, but it's one of the contributing reasons for my early addiction to pornography. Never got counseling, never got support, never got help for that, and just thought I could always deal with that on my own. If I just fight harder, fight stronger, create more resolutions, if I can do all of this, why in the world can't I do this? Right. If I can do all this, why can't I, have more self-control in this area of my life? And I will, and I didn't. And every year it would progressively get worse. And so what was a fantasy became reality. And so I would strongly encourage folks early on, if you can cultivate the transparency with it. Everybody doesn't need to know everything about life, but you need to have a couple of relationships where you are butt naked honest about everything.
Yeah, we talk about this a lot on the show. Leaders need to have mentors, right? They need to have people that can look honestly into their lives and speak into that.
Yeah.
Right. And that's what you're talking about.
Huge. Yeah. And working harder and doing better things and doing good things isn't going to fix that for you.
Right.
It's, so it doesn't, So it may contribute, but there's no amount of good work that you can do that's going to allow you to be in a place where you're dealing with the things you need to deal with internally. And that's where having good counseling, good transparent relationships of accountability and openness to deal with your mental health, your spiritual life, those are just things that you have to, and maybe it includes counseling. And sometimes I think folks have a negative perspective of counseling, but getting yourself into counseling and getting that support. Because if you don't, it's just it will progressively get worse and worse and worse. Whatever it is that is your struggle. It could be gambling. It could be a drug addiction. It could be alcohol. It could be, it could be a number of things. And so money.
In a sense, this is why with Focus 4C, we start with character, right? I mean, it's very difficult to lead others. It's very difficult to lead an organization if you haven't turned inwardly, right, and done the hard work to look inside. Who are you as an individual? Because that comes out.
Yeah.
Right. It may not come out in the business. It may come out in your family. Right. But it may come out in the business. Right. And so this is why we always come back to this foundational piece. What is at the core of who you are? Right. And what is that character that you're building out? Right. Are you committed to change? Are you open to the changes that need to happen in your life? Are you respecting others? And then are you expecting the results that are going to come out of that? Right.
And the irony in that is that it seems anyways, that it's very easy to get yourself into a place where you're brand managing. And the brand that you're managing is the brand of high character because it's essential to be a great leader. Mm-hmm. And therefore I can't make any mistakes. I have to be flawless.
Yeah.
And you start to, and that feeds your compartmentalization and figuring out a way to be authentically real. You are human. Right. You're human.
Going to make mistakes.
You will make mistakes. And,
absolutely.
And it doesn't mean that the whole world needs to know about every single detail of your life, but if you're isolated, you are a prime target for losing everything.
I talk to my students about this a lot, and we talk about it a lot on this podcast. And that is, as a leader, it's really a lot of reflection. Part of it is I'm always encouraging people to take time in the morning, think about who you are, what you want to be, right? What is that? What are those characteristics that you want to, emulate, right, and demonstrate? And that at the end of every day, make sure you stand back and reflect on that. Where did you fail? Right. Where were the bumps in the road?
That's great.
And then how do you improve? Because it's a lifetime, right? Yeah. Leading our own personal lives and leading others in a professional setting, they're kind of one and the same, right?
It's huge. I can't, Glenn. One of the things one of my kids said to me, Sam, he's like, "Dad, how did you start out so strong?" Because one of the most challenging moments in my own personal journey was sitting down with the kids. Sitting down with my wife and unveiling 10 years basically of absolute stuff that she doesn't know about and was hard enough. But then to sit down with the kids who, there was Jesus and there was Dad. And it's like, good grief, it's like,
right.
And to open up with them. And I remember Sam saying, "Dad, how did you start out so strong? And then all that happened. Like, what happened?" And I would say, Glenn, that was part of one of those areas of life that got cut away. Early on, I remember I had, and during my time in the Marine Corps, those early years, I had a daily rhythm of every morning, that self-reflection. Yeah. And for me, from a faith standpoint, time reading my Bible and praying and so on and so forth and journaling. And then in the evening, that reflection time. And then I allowed the busyness of life and
easy to do,
and my own pride, and so on and so forth, to start to say that wasn't essential. And I began to cut that away, and along with the isolation, you remove the reflection, the journaling, and you remove that out, and you isolate yourself. Oh my goodness.
Yeah. Well, in a small way, Focus 4C is trying to address that, right? So we have a weekly newsletter, and that newsletter is actually is designed to be sort of a reflection piece. What we want to do is every week sort of focus on one of the character traits of leadership, and whether that's forgiveness, respect, humility, and then it's a lifetime journey, and we want our readers to be able to just reflect on that. What does that mean in your own personal life? What does this trait mean in your professional life? And then how do you build it into your organization, right? And I want to move to that, because in your organization, you've got this great motivation, and you've got some great business principles that you've been talking about, how you started these companies and then refined them and narrowed them down. Some great business lessons there. And what I want to do is I want to focus then on, we've got so much to talk about. We need to bring this podcast to a close, but in our next podcast, I want to talk about kind of how do you take your employees and how do you shape them and how do you prepare them not only to be, good people, but to achieve the results that you're needing to convey to your customers, and I want to more explore that, because I think that's going to be a really interesting area. A lot of great lessons, I think, for our readers, our listeners in that area. And real quick, let's talk about this. How does all this translate in the way you think about your customers?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, at the end of the day, for us, I see this. Let me back up a little bit. So sometimes in the what people call the social entrepreneurial space, folks think that they can provide less of a quality product or service because of the charitable mission. And I would say that's not a good idea.
Right.
You want to do the exact opposite. You want to serve your customers with the wow effect. As a colleague of mine used that term in our place. It's like they have their expectations, and then you want to exceed those expectations. And then they get the additional great feeling that they're also a part of something beyond the service they're receiving. But don't expect the feeling of them contributing to something that's bigger than the service they're receiving as the first primary motive for what you do.
Got to deliver excellence.
So, exactly. And and so you're going to fail. You know that your team is not always going to perform at 100%. No, none of us, we all have our days. But you have systems in place from a quality assurance standpoint to back that up. And you have a management team that encourages and cultivates accountability and that is also accountable. And so you create a culture of accountability internally so that you can take care of and a heart for your customers. And for us, like, for example, in the commercial cleaning space, the last thing we want our customers to have to be thinking about is the cleanliness of their space.
Right.
Because they have a business to run.
Right.
And so they have customers to serve. And so our job is to make their job in serving their customers a lot easier. And so we often talk about that. And I will say that because of our mission internally, one of the other things that we're able to do is we're able to say that to the degree that we take care of our customers, they will talk about us.
Right.
In a positive way. Other folks will call and say, hey, I need some commercial cleaning. And guess what you just did? For the person that you served 20 years with in prison that's going to get out on parole next month, they have an opportunity now to come to work.
Right.
Because you created it. How'd you do that? By taking care of our customers.
It's amazing.
And so, but yeah, customer and, and sometimes, because of our hiring practices, sometimes we have to talk to customers in such a way. You have to build trust, right? And so some customers are like, oh, we love your mission. They come clean our space. And they're like, I'd almost say some customers like, we don't even care if it's clean. That's like how dramatic it is. It's like, but we have the CleanTurn way of cleaning.
Yeah.
And Candy, who's our lead trainer who developed a curriculum for the CleanTurn way of cleaning, if you don't clean their clean, it doesn't matter if a customer doesn't want it.
Yeah.
You go to Giordano's Pizza. If you want Little Caesars, you go to Giordano's. You're not expecting Little Caesars. Even if you're expecting Little Caesars, you're going to get Giordano's Pizza.
Yeah.
So even if you don't want your space clean, you just love our mission, we're going to clean your space.
Right. Yeah, I love that. Yeah, because it builds that trust and that rapport.
Yeah.
All right. Well,
and that's how you change perceptions. I mean, if a lot of times, folks, again, because of our mission of providing folks, in our broader culture, if you've done certain things in your past and you've spent time in jail and prison, the perception is you're a liability. Mm-hmm. Okay, how do you change perceptions? Well, you don't show up to CleanTurn with the expectation that you're just going to put on a CleanTurn uniform and an orange hat and expect all of a sudden that people are going to change their perception about who you are.
Right.
What you do, though, every single day, consistently, you do the CleanTurn way of cleaning. Over time, you're changing people's perceptions. If they so happen to learn a little bit more about your story, they're so shocked.
Right.
Because their stereotype of the sort of person that you are, in quotes, like, is not true. They just got their whole world shattered.
Right. Because
of your work ethic, the CleanTurn way of cleaning, and you just wowed them. Like, are you kidding me? Like, that's your opportunity, not mine. That's your opportunity to change perception. So.
All right. John, I'm going to have you come back. We're going to extend our time into another podcast here, and I want to talk more about this Turn Clean model and how you're treating your employees. I'm asking my guests to kind of give advice to our listeners. I think in your area, if I asked you, I think we've been talking about your advice, but part of it here is young leaders. What would you advise them to do? I think what we've been talking about, I think you would agree that be very self-aware of who you are, right? Don't go alone. Make sure you have mentors. Right. Maybe have a code of conduct even, right? And who you want to be. And then also on the customer side, I think your advice would be strive for excellence. Yeah. Because that builds trust with our employees. Anything you would add to that?
I mean, I think, guard your heart.
Interesting. Yeah.
Guard your heart. And how do you guard your heart? I think we touched on it, that self-awareness and that reflecting and journaling time. But, always evaluate the why behind what you're doing, your motives, your intentions. Be real with who you are. Be real with your struggles. Yeah. Don't try to hide them. Don't try to bury them. Deal with them. Work through them. Get additional support, whether it's a friend that you can trust or a counselor you can entrust yourself to. But be as authentic and real. Do not lie. You may not always be able to get to a place where you feel like the truth is 100% understandable or clear, but you want to be. You want to tell the truth. Sometimes things are extremely ambiguous. It's not so black and white. But don't. I remember hearing this from someone else. It's all over the place. I mean, I think it's in every religion on the face of the earth. Don't lie. Just don't lie. Don't lie. Yeah. Don't lie. And so. Well,
don't lie to others and don't lie to yourself.
100%. Yeah. Because and that's if I were to say one thing that would guard your heart the most, it's to get yourself to a place where you do not lie. Yeah. It's so freeing too. It's so freeing. Yeah. When I first opened up about my own struggle with pornography and sex and so on and so forth, I never thought I'd have freedom. Right. I thought it's impossible. Right. I got to a place where I'm like, it's just impossible. And I remember I was like, God, kill me. I'm done. I don't want to live anymore because I can't change this area of my life. I'm done. I'm over. It's over. You can have victory and you can have freedom. Don't lie. Don't lie.
All right. Well, thank you. We'll come back with more podcasts, with more guests, and we'll continue to explore the 4 C's. Thank you. Thanks for listening to the Building Better Business podcast. To stay up on the latest episodes, be sure to subscribe. And go to focus4c.com to sign up for a weekly newsletter for more stories and practical applications.